So sorry if I made a photo. I just realized I did so many talks and I have never made a picture of audience, and I'm pleasure to talk with you here. So I capture it for history, for memories. Usually I have pictures of myself, which is boring and not interesting to me, but pictures of audience is usually nice. So, buongiorno Firenze. I hope it's more or less good Italian. About myself, I am Andrii. I am originally from Ukraine. I moved to the Austria last 4 months ago. I contributor of Apache Airflow, OpenAPI, a little bit Golang, different Python projects, and also I did many talks. Also, I did a talk in Italy back to 2017, and I'm pleasure to hear and present my new journey about debuggers of async programs. So let's start. Development is really hard. It requires understanding, logic, and some hard skills of moving all things together. Usually, we say, my code has no errors, but it does not work. And this putting all together all these factors requires to us some passion and inclusive skills. There are many different books, even official documentation of Python, which explain you how to write programs, but there is no books about how to debug a program. And usually I spend like coding, I'm happy, and I realize that I spent like at least half of my working time to debugging what I wrote rather than development itself. Sometimes it's more. So this picture presents me between different phases, and especially moving to asynchronous programming, which interest has grown dramatically last few years. And this new model is different from classical sequential programming. So it's not new model in general, but I mean mainstream currently last couple of years. And debugging async programs is even harder than debugging sequential programs. And so like usually you see it and you like spend lots of time figuring out how to debug your program. So yeah, probably you can find yourself in this picture like I usually do. So okay, just reminder who not familiar with debugging. I assume nobody, so everybody know what is debugging. But debugging sequential programs, it's so how it looks like, right? So you put breakpoint on line using your IDE or console debuggers, whatever. And what should you do? You just click next, and step by step you jump until you find a problem, you fix it. So usually it requires repeated steps, so you do it in loops few times, even one day or hours, nights, lots of coffee, and you maybe can find a problem. And yeah, so you step into over. This picture also demonstrates. So sometimes you debug so many times, and you even can't understand why it doesn't work. So I have a question to you. How can you debug your Python program typically? Any suggestions? Correct. I have answered. Prince is the first modern debugger in the world. So like you put lots of prints and then like you run and you can find a problem. I have one advice for you. Do you have another ideas after prints? It's nice one, but another ideas? PyCharm logging, no. Okay, I will buy you a beer or whatever wine if you find correct answer. Okay, logging, no. Okay, so even yesterday I've been in Rome. So I saw like a shop of debuggers here in Rome, so you can find something. Okay, so nobody last chances. Hmm? Yes, correct. So you win beer. Just send me like I will buy after conference. Yeah, this is my favorite one. So this is not a joke. This is real. So you can find it in like in Wikipedia. But the idea is like you sit and you if somebody against you, you can explain step by step of what you are doing, right? And usually you can realize even not waiting for answer, you can realize, oh, you know the answer and you go back and fix it, right? So the call is duck debugging. So if there is nobody in the room, you can just put a duck and you can just explain to the duck. And yeah, so sometimes it helps. Yeah, and you can, I think you can find it in Italy a lot. So you can buy one and put it, and or just you can rent it if you have a children's, you can rent few. So okay, but returning to other answers, there was all correct ones. Yeah, so you can use logging, but if if you ask me, logging is not about debugging, it's more about tracing. So just it's not about debuggers, but okay, it's nice one to help. REPL is I will explain a little bit later, but probably you know what it's about. Of course, you can use debuggers. I will focus mostly on console debuggers. I used to use a lot console debuggers, but in general, you can use IDE or visual debuggers. It's same idea. Okay, so let's start from logs. So I assume you're using Python. In Python, there Asyncio default model, which helps you to write asynchronous code. So first you need to know it's you can enable debug mode for Asyncio by exporting this environment variable, and it starts printing you some extra information. It's very useful. You can using Python dev mode. It also do the same, plus some extra stuff. You can read about Python dev mode if needed. Also, when you run your program, usually in the end you have somewhere asyncio run, which starts loop and do anything you need to like run everything, and you can pass debug through keyword, and or you can directly, if you have instance of the loop, you can set debug method, which helps you to do what you need. So in general, all these steps, what it does for you, there are a few important items. First, it's find not awaited coroutines. So then it can find many non-thread safe Asyncio API raises, such as I don't know, loop call soon or something, if they are called from wrong like thread. It also can show you execution time of some coroutines, and also by default, if coroutine like if coroutine takes more than 100 milliseconds, it also print it, or you can change it. So yeah, it's just same. Okay, let's go to the deep dive of examples, because it's not boring like this slide. Okay, so by default, if you run Asyncio in debug mode, it will start printing you only the first log will goes from Asyncio, others is just mine. And also, if one of the coroutine took more than 100 milliseconds, as I mentioned, it will print it. Be aware, if it's too quick and less than 100 milliseconds, you will not see this warning, or you can change this parameter. So if you're interested, I don't know, 50 milliseconds, so you can change it. Or if you're interested only in very slow waits, I don't know, if something waiting more than 1 second, so you can also configure it and find it. Okay, so understandable, enable logs, enable debug mode, we're okay. Next, usually, again, back to REPL, it's redevel print loop, which usually we prefer to use in Python. So you just run Python, right? And you can type something and see result. So sometimes if you know the problem, you can copy it and just try. That's why I like a lot Python. So no need anything, just run Python and type and see result. So here's the example. If you try to invoke await inside default REPL, especially in Python 3.6, for instance, you will see this issue like you can't use await. Here's a bug which already has been fixed by Yuri Silivanov, by the way. So he suggested, let's fix this problem. So I would like to use await in REPL. For instance, it works in Node.js. There here a specific flag like enable await blah blah blah, and you can also do awaits inside REPL. That's why Yura suggested and fixed it. So if you're using, for instance, 3.9.7, I think it has been merged since 3.8, if I'm not mistaken. I have 3.9. Now we have 3.10 stable, 3.12 in development. So we are very far from this issue. But here's important: if you run default REPL, it will not work. I don't know, did you have a chance to capture or not? But if you run REPL using -m asyncio, just Python -m asyncio, and then you will see this is on the top screen, first line. It's Asyncio REPL, which is very limited. For instance, it doesn't support read lines. You can't do search, history, comments like default one. So PRs are welcome, of course. So, but at least you can do awaits, and as on screen, you can, I don't know, do using IOHTTP or other libraries, or just await anything, and you can get a response. For instance, if you're using IPython REPL, it supports await evaluation since 3.6, I think. Here's a document which explains that they edited a while ago. So if you're on IPython, you can also do this example. Same with Jupyter, of course. You just need to install PyKernel, and with debugger inside Jupyter, you can await something. As you can see, it works. But like REPL is okay. It's just when you have example and you can lay out something very quick. But returning back to real world production, usually use, as you all mentioned, debuggers. For instance, Python debugger, which is default, or IPDB, which is you have to install. I have a few slides for you. Let's deep dive in PDB a little bit. So here we have more or less real world application, at least not which with REPL or something. We have few functions and we run it, and we need to figure out that foo return something, or maybe we have other lines, and we can set breakpoint. So if you type directly in your program breakpoint, or previously it should be import pdb set trace, you can set breakpoint, and if you run it, you can see we execute, we can type next or whatever, and we can debug your program. So no issues. I mean, you can jump here, there, so and find a problem. So like default PDB more or less works with this code. Still, if you use console debuggers, I highly recommend you to try PDB++, which is just like a sugar. So it has this fancy, so it stick your screen, and you can, like in PyCharm, If you type next, it will jump in. Okay? But returning back to asynchronous programming, assume you have IPDB, you install it, you like it. As I think once Andrii Soldatenko suggested it for me, I never returned back to visual debuggers. One advantage, it's very quick and you can debug even inside containers. I mean, bunch of pluses. So highly recommend to check it. And it's absolutely works the same as PDB, just slightly introduce sugar. And interesting tip for you, if you still like this breakpoint, you can override this environment variable, Python breakpoint, and it will set IPDB set trace each time when you type breakpoint, like here. So, and in this case, it starts breakpoint with IPDB, which you can debug. Okay, and then you realize that you would like to await. Just return back, we just did with REPL, you remember, we did inside REPL, we did await something, and it worked, more or less, right? And you say, okay, I'm in debugger, I would like await, and you see await outside a function, syntax error, and you can, oh, wow. You go, Google, as usual. You can see await does not work in IPDB, even through IPython supports it. You read, you know it, like you read this long issue, you try to figure out what's wrong, how, I will spoiler you a little bit, how to await a coroutine in PDB. As usual, you like, we never had the time, we need a workaround. So as you already saw, the issue has been closed without even solution. So, but if you dig into concepts and try to understand what we are really doing under the hood when we debug with IPDB, you can understand that by design, Asyncio does not allow event loop to be nested. What does it mean? When we run it, and if we dig into IPDB, we can see, okay, we can get current loop, we can check that current loop is already running, and to await something, we need somehow to spawn this like function to currently running event loop, but we can't do it. So we can only do it using like create event loop and put it inside. So in this case, we see this runtime error, and yeah. So, and here's the solution for you, just for debugging needs. Here's a nested Asyncio function. Sorry, Python package. What it does is just patch Asyncio to allow nested Asyncio run and loop run until complete. And if you run, so you need to import this module. It will patch using monkey patch, I think, Asyncio. And then if you start debugging, real world example, I added more complicated one. You have async open file, then you do async file write, then you do seek 0, then you have breakpoint, and then you do some await. And you decided that you need to await this ifp.read. You can't, but if you run it with as like in the bottom of the screen inside PDB session, you can run this get event loop, which return you current event loop, and then you can send to this loop another like this function. As you can see, it will print you content. So that's how you can just figure out that the results of the file reading. Otherwise, you need to put lots of prints, and there is no any chance, or loggers, so there is no any chance to figure out. Sometimes you need to figure out what this async function returns to you, especially if it's wrapper another function which do something. Okay. Another example, if you're running, let's say in Kubernetes or in Docker on production, you can't install package, right? So you're running something and it gets stuck on something and you don't know what to do. You can't install package, redeploy with debugger. I mean, you can, but sometimes you need a monitor. So I highly recommend use this tool, aiomonitor. What it does, you run your application with context manager, aiomonitor. It exposes port, so you can do expose this port in any cloud native infrastructure. So assume your application running on 8080 and aiomonitor on another port. It can be hidden outside of the world, just open inside your dev infra, and using netcat or other tools, you can connect to this port and you can see what's currently task are running, and at least figure out what pieces of your code like get stuck on waiting something. Together with this aiomonitor, you can find this another like kind of example with aioconsole, which do bunch of stuff, but more or less it's useless except bunch of patches already has been merged. IPython also supports it, but you can just, this is more about await syntax inside REPL. Okay, we have not too much time, so let's return to real world examples. Another problem is deadlocks. Python, not like other languages, for instance, especially in Golang, you can like run deadlock checker, which already in the language. With Python, you can't do it. So assume you have, what is deadlock problem? You have like a code which one depend on another. If you're very catchy, you can figure out we have two functions and they like rely on each other, and if you run this program on a first glance it really looks good, so nothing bad with this function, but you will see this like, and Python will never say to you nothing interesting except maximum recursion core when your memory finished, so get occupied, and it would be nice, like I'm looking for a way to automatically handle deadlocks. Yeah. So here's issue in bug tracker of the Python. So like you can read it. I will share a slide, so just to not overload you with links. And here's the, like, for now there are only, at least I know only one approach. Here's a snippet which you can use to like wrap your code, accept this recursion core and try to cancel if needed and raise. Yeah, it's a little bit tricky one, but if you go to this link, you can find a full example. But the idea, this code try to find such circular task dependency and find deadlocks. So yeah, if you know better ideas of how to do it, please let me know. Probably the last example for today. It's a wait what. So what is the wait what? It's another tricky problem, which assume you have a chain of execution of awaits. So you need to read it, let's say, from the bottom to the top. So you can see one depend on another, execute another. So bunch of awaits, and as a result, first line, wait for socket, or I don't know, wait for something. And the problem comes from the production. Sometimes you can realize that your program from time to time hang and wait and never finish, and then you just reboot your server. It would be nice to you to find this place. As I already mentioned, you can't even debug it because you don't know the place, so you can't put a debugger, right? It's just from time to time, so like once a week. It's very typical. You restart the server, just hang, and you don't know what's the problem. If you enable debugging logs, you see nothing. So you probably can find something is waiting, but what's waiting for what, you can't. So await what is like a small proof of concept library which trying to solve long-running Asyncio programs that appears to get stuck. And with await what, it just, we can see this like chain of execution in logs. Yeah, it looks a little bit like exception, but it's just bad formatted by author. But at least you see what depends on what. Plus, it can show you graph dependency chart. It's not fully on the screen because it's too big, but in general, you can figure out what depends on what and figure out what's the problem. When you find a problem, you can put PDB and then you can debug the issue. And last, I think last one is, as I promised, aiodebug is one very nice library, which, like, again, it's just a sugar around of what I already mentioned. It just helps you to enable, again, logs plus some formatting and as I mentioned, it just works on some measurement. Here is 500 milliseconds, if I'm not mistaken. And it will show you this error. So by default, and you will see like something like it. I have a coroutine which runs like more than 3 or 4 seconds, and yeah, it's too long, so you can print it in logs. Why we need it? It's useless, right? But you can also expose it to any metrics collection system you have, like an example, so you can monitor on your different coroutines which and execution time. So you can find, okay, this execution time of this coroutine is slow on statsd or other dashboard and metrics. It's just example. So final thoughts. Enable the debug mode when you're developing. For production, yeah, try to expose metrics as much as you can. Of course, use debuggers like PDB and other sugar ones, IPDB, etc. Yeah, if you're using Docker, try aiomonitor. Yeah, as I already mentioned, yeah, I work on Sentry, just joined like a few weeks ago. We are hiring. If you need anything about Sentry, just let me know. I will try to explain. You probably all know what is Sentry, right? So, cool. Questions?
So, thank you very much to Andrii. So the first question is aiomonitor able to give you the whole context of the exception, like asyncio.loop.exception handler, so you can get local and global vars values?
Good question. I need to check. I can, if you send me this question, I will send you a link. I think yes, but I need to check. So, what else?
I was the one making the question, because I saw in the slide that aiomonitor seems like the old Raven Sentry that logged everything happened, but you have the stack trace, which is useful, as you said, in tracing when you are in production. But what you want also is knowing, at least in the in each of the stack steps, the value of each local value, of each local and global
you mean context, right?
Yes, I mean context. I mean global, local, and not global, because it's Python 3. So you can see what happened, because if you know just the breaking point, and you don't know the values of the variable, can do anything.
Yeah, correct. Yeah, but I think you can check it in docs. If not, I can check and answer. But I think not with aiomonitor, but just in general, you not always see exception if you're coroutine. So you need to do something with that. But
what I do is just set what I usually do is setting in async IO loop a custom exception handler.
Yeah.
That logs that moves through the stack trace.
Yeah.
And from each stack prints the usual stack trace and explores with dirs and vars all the local and global variables. So when I see a stack trace, I know everything, every variable at each step, and
yeah, it's a good idea. Yeah, I think you can also it's like callback, right? So you can maybe aiomonitor also support this. Just need to check. So I use it like few times. It's very nice, but just when it's hanging, you're trying everything, and I just would like to demonstrate there are bunch of tools with limitations and for different problems. So okay.
So yeah, the next question is, did you find or remember in your daily work some bug in production that made the debug difficult and longer than sync usual code?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I think I understand, if I understand correctly. Yeah, there are like, I would say not my personal bug because it's usually team effort, right? And even Git blame not usually says the truth who did what. But yeah, there are a few examples when we spend like a few hours in debugging, and I think we wrote it faster. So, and good advice, if you get stuck in debugging more than, I don't know, hour or two, you should do a break. I don't know, go to outside, drink a coffee, just try to, because sometimes you did not like see something very easy or whatever. Yeah, or try another like direction, but usually try to not do it like few hours in one loop. Just do short breaks.
Yeah, also for our safety, we shouldn't do more than 15 minutes. For instance, I use Pomodoro technique, by the way.
Yeah.
And this is not exactly a question because can we get the slides?
Yes, of course. Okay. It should be there, but I need to first share it, and I can, if you follow me on Twitter or suggest where to send it, I just post it in Twitter.
Okay, so I have a question, probably last one. Okay, so you said you've been hired by Sentry recently. So can you spoil something about the fact how are you going to use in Sentry those tools in order to, I don't know, provide more features and new versions of the Sentry SDK?
I don't know. I don't have ideas. I mean, it's open source, so you can go and see source code, right? Nothing hidden.
Okay.
So there's everything well documented. So, but yeah, it's general. So the patterns I used here I use in different languages, as I mentioned, Node.js or Golang, and they like helps you to figure out what's how to tackle this problem.
So I would say we are right, and thank you.